Gracious God, we ask that you speak to us today. We've been drawn here for lots of different reasons. Some people for many, many years. Some of us are doubters. Some of us are skeptics. Some of us aren't even sure where we are today. But we're here. We're here because we yearn for a fuller life, and we yearn to have an encounter with you so that we can be connected and grounded in the very source of our lives. That was revealed to us in Jesus the Christ, and it's through Christ that we pray this day and say together, Amen. I confess, as I was coming down the steps, I saw a chair that was right back by Carol Thomas, and I thought, I wonder if that's there for Jesus, because it was empty. But Liz is sitting in it now. So I've been working on a sermon series, What Makes a Progressive Christian? And the root of this sermon series has been the teaching from Matthew's Gospel when someone asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And of course he said, love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So there are three loves wrapped up in that teaching. Love of God, love of neighbor, love of self. And this week, it's love of self. Notice in this wordle that love is really big, Lord and God's pretty big, neighbor's pretty big, and yourself is kind of little. Ever wondered about that? So there's the sequence, love of God, love of neighbor, love of self. And for the fully redeemed person, Jesus, Thomas Merton, Julian of Norwich, I understand from Kathy Toma last week that it's not Norwich, it's Norwich, if you're really from the area. Maya Angelou is another completely redeemed person. If you're a completely redeemed person, the sequence of love God, love neighbor, and love self makes sense. But for most of us who aren't completely redeemed, it probably wouldn't hurt to focus a little bit on love of self. Can I get a witness on that? And I want to start with the have I lost my mind? Because we live in a truly narcissistic world. Where it may be, you'd be wondering, why on earth would a preacher ever want to talk about self-love? Because I think we probably have that in spades, and that's part of the problem. Well, maybe I didn't lose my mind. Maybe it was sold in the rummage sale yesterday. But I want to start with love of self because I'm sure we've all had different experiences of church, but one of the traditions of church as I experienced it growing up is that you really weren't supposed to enjoy life too much, and you really, if you were uncomfortable in church, notice these wooden pews. They're not cushioned and they're not shaped like these pews. They are like a 90-degree angle, so when you sit in them, they actually hurt, which was what it was like in the New England church that I grew up in. Did anybody else grow up in pews where it actually was uncomfortable to sit in them? Which was sort of a vestige of the Puritan era, which is you should be very suspicious of your body because we all know about the appetites of the body and the trouble that can get you into. Yes, and God gave us minds, hearts, and bodies for our enjoyment and good use and healthy living. So I want to start with the importance of love of self because the church in many ways ground into us that we should be ashamed or guilty about any kind of appetite that we have. Anybody ever struggle with that growing up in church? I even met with a fellow who was African-American preacher a couple of weeks ago, and I said, you know, the funny thing about piety in the church where I grew up in is that the quieter you are, the more religious you are. I think that's kind of not very fair to the living God, the one who burst out of the tomb. We got a lot of cultural influences, though, in our narcissistic society, don't we? We live in an age of unprecedented material success and comfort. Too easy, too spoiled. Does that make any sense to anybody? You know, I'm not sure if I'm becoming an old curmudgeon or not, but I do know that there is some wisdom to some of the people who grew up through the Depression and World War II and knew how difficult life could be. And that was a character builder. So I do think there might be some legitimacy to, we are living in an age, people my age and younger, who haven't really sacrificed or known what that is. So there is a chance that we can slip into some sense of privilege. So the Randall Bodmans, for example, there are 3 people living in our house. We have 3 cars. We have a 4-bedroom house with 3 people, a dog, and a cat. Doesn't that seem like overkill? We can chuckle about it, but the reality is that in our consumer-driven society, we are measured by how well we consume. We are what we consume. Can I get a witness on that? It's a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge, I find, anyway. Easy to confuse instant gratification for self-love. So what is self-love? Well, it's actually given to us in the book of Genesis. It's an acceptance of and surrender to this incredible gift that God created us and everything and said, it's very good. It's very good. And you see, that's the original blessing. And I really believe that the church in many ways made a mistake by focusing so much on original sin that original blessing can get blocked. About anybody struggle with that? Original blessing. And so Jesus let us know, I've come that you may have life and have it abundantly, as big as the ocean. That blows our minds. And we struggle, I think. Do we really deserve that kind of love? If God really knew us, would we get that unconditional love? Of course, the answer is yes. Abundant love. Never going to run out. It's never going to run out. God's love will never run out. Say it after me. God's love will never run out. God's love will never run out. Now, you've said the words. Is it here? There it is. I love that picture. It's the, whoa. Even animals recognize it. And we know ourselves, which is why Philippians said, let each of you look not to your own interest. People, some theologians have called our shadow side. Every one of us has a shadow side. We may not think we do, but we do. So I want to give you a quick lesson on self-love using the Enneagram, which is a way of looking at spiritual development based on what your strengths are and what your challenges are. So for a minute, there are a lot of words up there. I just want you to look at this column right here, pitfalls. Lethargy, hypersensitivity, flattery, vanity, melancholy, emotional stinginess, cowardice, and revenge. How many of you can relate to at least one of those pitfalls? Because I'm hitting just about all of them. You could probably add a couple more up there. But these are the dead ends, right? let's just pick revenge for a minute. How many of you have had something happen and you want to get somebody for doing that, and you're going to hold on to it, and before you know it, there's a hole burned in your soul? And who is hurt? You. Not the other person. They're gone. They're not even thinking about it anymore. So let's go to this category. This is callings. For each of these, if you read across the line, here's the calling and here's the fruit of the Spirit. Lethargy, or we could call it by its deadly sin name, sloth, laziness. Oh, I'd rather not do anything. Who struggles with sloth? It's okay, there are 9 types, so I'm going to get you one way or the other and set you free. That's the whole point. You cannot be set free by love until you know what it is that you're chained by. Whoops. That's not what I meant to do. Yet. So I happen to be a 1 on the Enneagram, so I can really get this row right here. Hypersensitivity. Ones are hypersensitive because we have an inner critic that is so good at criticizing me and everybody around me that if anybody criticizes me, I'm going to be hypersensitive because you know what? I've already criticized myself to death. How about emotional stinginess? Ever been around somebody that... we know what hoarding is. This is sort of the avarice. This is the... but we usually think of money. Ebenezer Scrooge is the consummate stingy guy. But sometimes we're stingy with our own energy, our own emotion, our own... Ever since that, about stinginess? Yeah. How about flattery? Ever noticed how that can kind of hook you? Somebody says something really nice about you, before you know it, you're ready to go across the street and get their groceries, and no, you wouldn't do that, would you? But you might do something else. Because we like to be important. Right? We like to be valuable. So each one of these pitfalls has a calling. So if you struggle with vanity, I'm sure nobody in this room struggles with vanity. Then there's socks on that match this morning. Sometimes I don't. I shaved really close. And I was careful about which tie I picked out, but vanity's not an issue for me. Hope is the calling. This is what God's calling us to do to get out of the pitfall. Hope. And then the fruit of having hope is truthfulness. This is not only truthfulness about yourself, but truthfulness with others. So if you've ever wrestled with vanity, you know that really what you're doing is covering up because you really don't think you're that beautiful or that attractive, or you wouldn't work so hard at it. Right? Isn't this uncovering the truths that all of us wrestle with? That's why it's hard to love ourselves. Because we're constantly pretending. And all the while, God has said, it's good, you're very good. You're very good. But we can sometimes chase other things because we all have the need for intimacy. Doesn't necessarily mean sexual intimacy, it just means intimacy of some variety. Physical, emotional, spiritual. We all have a hunger for relationships. We're social creatures. We're created that way. Even if you live in isolation, even if you were in solitary confinement, you would be in relationship with your memory of people and or what you're thinking about them. And we are people who have to take care of ourselves. We have a self-preservation need. And that's why all of these things kind of factor out the way they do, because we chase the need sometimes for the wrong thing. You know that we are living in a time where sleep depravity is one of the leading causes of illness. Not having enough sleep. Self-love would begin with giving yourself enough sleep. So depending on where you are on the spectrum, that's why self-love, there is no one-size-fits-all. There is no one answer. Because it's going to depend on which one of these things up here you wrestle with the most, because most of us gravitate. Do you see yourself gravitating towards one of those pitfalls? The good news is you've begun to understand the power of God's love for you that was revealed in Jesus the Christ, who said, I don't care whatever you do, you can be as awful as you think you may be. You can even nail me to a cross. And not even that will separate you from the love that God has for you, just as you are, so that you can become the people that God would have you become. So now it's time for the mask, because that's part of self-love is moving from false self to true self. And true self is our identity that's given to us by God, that we are God's beloved. How many of you find it easier to take care of someone else than to receive care? Most people that come to churches are good givers. I mean, they're in terms of servanthood. Maybe what God is inviting you for self-love is to let someone else do something for you. And if you're the type that receives too easily or very easily, maybe God's asking you to do something for somebody else. God's love meets us wherever we are to claim us, to help us go from dead end to hear a calling and to see the fruits of the Spirit. So just know that there's a mask. We all have them. And know that God can see past it, which gives us the freedom to be ourselves. Thanks be to God, who has given us this message that unconditional love is a free gift, just like the Son, and it's spelled S-U-N, and of course we are the people of the S-O-N, so the unconditional love comes to us through both. The people were heard to say, Amen.